It was in 1928 that Joan Crawford bought a Spanish villa that would become the most famous home in Hollywood. It was the site of fancy parties and meetings with Hollywood stars for 30 years. But after she died in 1977, police found troubling truths, ghostly activity, hidden wealth, and a shocking will that showed the dark side of Hollywood's perfect family. What took place in that house, and why Crawford's ghost still lives there. There were a lot of problems in Joan Crawford's early life. She was born in San Antonio, Texas, on March 23, 1906. When she was young, her father left the family. This made things hard for her mother, and they were very poor. Joan worked as a laundress to help her family by the time she was 11 years old. She was strong and worked hard, even when she was a child. Joan had an accident when she was 12 years old that changed her life. She tried to jump on a moving car, but the glass cut her foot. They thought they might have to cut off her leg because the wound got so bad. She got better after 3 surgeries, but this made her afraid of getting illnesses for the rest of her life. This fear made her want to be clean all the time, which made her popular in Hollywood. Joan went to Missouri Stevens College when she was 16, but she left after only a few months. Her dream was to dance, so she moved to Chicago and joined a chorus line as Billy Casson and started getting better at being on stage. She got to New York City in 1924. Harry Raff, an MGM director, saw her there. He offered her a test and a job that would pay her $75 a week. A letter she got on December 24th, 1924, changed her life for good. A friend gave her $400 to pay for her trip, and she set off for Hollywood to start a new life. Her path to Hollywood started in a small way. She worked as Norma Shea's body double just a few weeks after she got there. In the 1925 movie Lady of the Night, it was 19 seconds of her back being shown in one scene. You couldn't tell, but this was her first time on TV. Later, Joan made fun of the fact that her first role was funny because she was just covering for Norma Shear. Joan's first part with a name was in Sally, Irene, and Mary in 1925. At that point, MGM chose she needed a new name. They got the idea from Lucille Le Sueur. It sounded like garbage too much. So, a magazine poll was held, and the winner was Joan Crawford. In the end, that name would be known all over the world. The movie The Unknown, which came out in 1927, was her big break. Todd Browning was in charge of this dark and strange story. Joan played Nanon, a circus artist who was scared of men's hands. She falls in love with a man who isn't wearing any arms, but she doesn't know who he really is. The movie made over $808,000, and reviewers thought Joan was great in it. It made people notice her and helped her get bigger parts. Joan became famous with Our Dancing Daughters in 1928. In the 1920s, people were wild and didn't care about anything. Diana was a young woman played by Joan who loved to dance and enjoy life to the fullest. In a well-known scene, she danced the Charleston for more than 3 minutes on a table. The filming took 2 days, and by the end, her feet were hurting. But she didn't give up until it was just right. It made over $1 million at the box office, which is a great sign. Joan's fancy clothes, like a dress with shimmering beads, became famous. She was so in tune with the spirit of the jazz age that Scott Fitzgerald called her the perfect flapper. In the 1930s, Joan Crawford's life was full of changes and risks, but she didn't give up. Many stars couldn't make the change from silent movies to talking movies. They either didn't fit or couldn't change. Joan didn't want to quit her job, so she put in a lot of effort to adapt. She practiced all the time and took singing lessons to get better. Her hard work paid off when her first talkie, Untamed, 1929, became a big hit. Joan played Bingo Dowling in Untamed. She was a wild woman who grew up in the bush and was trying to fit in with other people. She could show off her new skills in this part. Voice teachers helped her practice her lines for hours, and she worked long days to make sure everything was right. Since movies changed so quickly, there was a lot at stake. If she failed, it could mean the end of her career. But the movie was a hit when it came out. It made almost $1 million, which was a lot of money at the time because the Great Depression had just begun. The critics loved her act, and she was sure to have a bright future in Hollywood. Sadly, there are no copies of the movie left today, which makes her amazing first appearance in a talking picture even more mysterious. Joan not only made it in Hollywood, she thrived there. By the middle of the 1930s, she was one of MGM's biggest stars. She was up against tough actors like Greta Garbo and Norma Shearer. The best part was given to Norma Shearer because she was married to Irving Thalberg, who was the boss at MGM. Joan didn't like it and famously said, "How can I compete with Norma when she's sleeping with the boss?" Joan's movies often made more money at the box office, even with this flaw. Fans loved how approachable and hardworking she seemed. Her feud with Garbo was classy, while Joan was more down-to-earth and easy to talk to. Both were successful, but Joan stood out because she worked so hard all the time. Everyone she worked with respected her because she always got to every set early and ready to go. During this time, Joan's most well-known movies were Grand Hotel, 1932, and The Women, 1939. A lot of people saw Grand Hotel, which starred Greta Garbo and John Barrymore. Joan really shone when she played a stenographer who dreams of being a star. It made a lot of money and won an Oscar for Best Picture. The Women showed up later when Joan needed to make a point. In 1938, she was called box office poison, but her part as a sharp and evil woman in The Women showed that she could still draw people in. The movie did well at the box office and helped her image. Joan became famous for playing roles of people who had to work hard to get ahead. During the Great Depression, people really related to these rags-to-riches stories. Movies like Dancing Lady, 1933, and Sadie McKee, 1934, showed women getting through hard times, which gave people hope when the economy was bad. Joan played a burlesque dancer out to make it on Broadway in Dancing Lady. The movie was a huge hit, and it was also Fred Astaire's first movie part. Sadie McKee told the story of a woman from the middle class who moved up in society. And so many people went to see it that it broke records for theater attendance. Lots of people could relate to Joan's characters, and her own story of going from being poor to being famous made her even more amazing. Clark Gable was one of Joan's most well-known partners. They worked together on 8 movies, beginning with Dance, Fool's Dance, 1931. It was electric to watch them together on TV, and fans loved it. The 1931 movie Possessed is about a woman who becomes the mistress of a rich man. It deals with themes of class and ambition. The movie made over $1 million, which is a lot of money. The movie Dancing Lady was also a big hit, and Joan's character got better at show business. Between the scenes, Joan and Clark were dating, which made their movies more exciting. Even though they were no longer together after their affair, their last movie together, Strange Cargo, 1940, showed how well they got along. Their movies made more than $15 million for MGM together, making them one of the most famous pairs in Hollywood history. In the 1940s, Joan Crawford's whole life changed. She had been a big star at MGM for 18 years, but by 1943, things were going badly for her. MGM used to believe in her, but now they don't. She felt like they no longer respected her because they kept giving her small parts in bad movies. The last straw was when they gave Greer Garson the lead role in Madame Curie, a part Joan really wanted. That was enough for her. She did a terrible thing. She paid $100,000 to get out of her deal with MGM. It was very dangerous to do this. At that time, women her age were seen as too old to work, so a lot of people thought her career was over. Joan didn't give up, though. She got a new deal with Warner Brothers just 2 days after leaving MGM. She got $500,000 for 3 movies, which at the time was a huge sum of money. It also gave her the power to approve stories, which she had never had before. She wasn't going to watch any more bad movies. It took her a year and a half to find the right part, so she turned down script after script. Someone else didn't want that part, but it came up in Mildred Pierce, 1945. Betty Davis and Sheridan and Barbara Stanwyck all said no, but Joan jumped at the chance. It wasn't easy to get the part. I think Michael Curtis, the director, didn't want Joan at first. He believed she was too old for Hollywood, but Joan pushed for it. She agreed to work at her level, which she almost never did, and she paid for her own hair, makeup, and clothes for the job. It wasn't easy to film. Curtis was very angry and often yelled at Joan, but she didn't give in. He made fun of her at one point, and she fought back. The set went dark until the studio head came and opened it again. But the movie was a big hit when it was over. People crowded into theaters to see Joan's act, which got great reviews. Joan got the Oscar for Best Actress in 1946 for her role in Mildred Pierce. She didn't go to the event because she didn't think she would win. Joan's fame grew after Mildred Pierce. It was in 1946 that she played a rich woman in love with a young pianist. She was praised by critics, and people loved the movie. Some scenes, like the one where she walks into the ocean, were shot over 3 days in very cold water because Joan insisted on making it perfect. Then in Possessed, 1947, she played a woman who was slowly going crazy. To get ready, Joan went to a mental hospital to learn more about the case. After all her hard work, she was nominated for another Oscar for her role. Joan did not stop moving forward. She played a writer whose husband is trying to kill her in the 1952 movie Sudden Fear. She wasn't just the star. She also helped make the movie happen by persuading the company to buy the story and cast her in it. The movie did well, and Joan was nominated for her third Oscar. That time, she was 47 years old. That age didn't matter because of how good she was. In Female on the Beach, 1955, Joan Crawford played a wealthy widow. The movie made over $2.5 million, which shows that people still liked her. After that, in 1964, she played Lucy Harbin in A Straitjacket. People named Lucy were locked up for 20 years after killing their husband. There was a lot of applause for Joan's work on the character because she made her scary and sad. Joan was brave when she picked out her parts. She played the lead in Autumn Leaves in 1956 when she was 51 years old. She played a woman who was lonely and fell in love with a younger man. Big age gaps and mental illness were talked about in the movie, which is something that most movies don't do. By taking on these parts, Joan stayed popular and showed that older actresses could still do well in Hollywood, even when many were passed over. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which came out in 1962, was one of her most well-known movies. It was with Bette Davis, who had been her enemy for a long time. It came out on Halloween and was about two older sisters who had a strange and dark connection with each other. It brought Joan and Bette back into the public eye and started a new type of horror movie with older stars. But it wasn't easy to make the movie. Joan and Bette did not get along. Bette hurt her back trying to drag Joan in one scene because Joan had rocks in her bags and made herself very heavy. What a big success the movie was. It made $9 million, even though it only cost less than $1 million to make. 4 or 5 Oscars, but Joan wasn't one of them. And Bancroft won for The Miracle Worker, but she couldn't be there. Joan stepped in to take the award, taking Bette's place. Joan went on to be in more scary movies after Baby Jane, such as Straitjacket and I Saw What You Did. These movies were made because Baby Jane was so popular. Fans still love the movie, and the famous line, "But you are Blanche, you are in that chair," is often used. In the movie, she played a doctor who finds a caveman. The movie didn't have a lot of money, and Joan even dressed up in her own clothes for her part. A lot of people thought it was funny that she taught the caveman how to play with toys in one scene. People didn't like the movie, but Joan gave it her all and took the part very seriously. After that, she made a joke that she didn't care if she couldn't end her career with a bang. She was happy to end it with a laugh. Trog became a cult favorite over time. It's so bad it's good. Later in her work, Joan also went on TV. She was on General Electric Theater in 1955. In 1959, she played a woman running away from a killer on an episode of Zane Grey Theater. She even played a bad girl in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. in 1967. In 1969, she was in a pilot for Night Gallery that was directed by a young Steven Spielberg. Millions of people watched the show, which showed that Joan could still get people's attention. She even went on a comedy show on her 66th birthday in 1970, which showed that she didn't take herself too seriously. In real life, Joan Crawford was as dramatic as she was in her movies. It was big news that she was married 3 times. Doug Fairbanks Jr., her first husband, was the son of a famous silent movie star. Joan was 21 years old when she got married on June 3, 1929. He was 19 years old. Joan wanted his mom, Mary Pickford, to like her more than anyone else. It hurt her a lot that they would never accept her, even though she took lessons to change her accent and learned how to behave properly. Douglas liked to take it easy, while Joan was also very driven. There were reports that both of them cheated, which made things worse. In 1933, after 4 years together, they split up. The second man she married was Frank at one, a different character. On October 11, 1935, they got married. Bette Davis and Joan, who was competing with her, were both trying to win his heart before they got together. Joan won, but they had a lot of problems in their marriage. She had 2 miscarriages, and after each one, reports of abuse spread. When Joan found him with a young actress, things got worse. In 1939, they got a divorce. She got married to Philip Terry for the 3rd time. They got married on July 21, 1942, and Philip Terry Jr. was born to them. But after 4 years, this marriage also ended. Joan changed the name of her son to Christopher Crawford when they got split in 1946. She was very in love with each of her husbands at first, but they all ended in heartbreak. It was important for Joan to have children, but she kept having losses, so she looked into adoption. It wasn't easy for her to adopt her first child, Christina, in 1940. Because Joan was single, she couldn't adopt in California. There was no law against it in Nevada, so she used a baby trader and went there. After a year, she adopted a boy, but the birth mother took him back because she was too much trouble for Joan. Joan was very sad. She took in another boy and gave him the name Philip Terry Jr., but she changed it to Christopher later. After the death of their real mother in 1947, she took in twin girls named Kathy and Cindy. Joan kept going even though it was hard to raise her kids. A lot of Joan's life, she also had trouble with drinking. It began when she was married for the second time in the late 1930s. It turned into a big problem by the 1940s. Joan loved vodka so much that she called it her morning cocktail, drank on movie sets. Even people who worked with her, like Betty Davis on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, became aware of her. Her drinking also made it harder for her to get along with her kids. Christina wrote in her book Mommy Dearest that Joan was violent when she was drunk. Some people don't believe that book is true, but Joan's drinking did make things tense at home. Her drinking hurt her work too. By the 1960s, movie directors had to promise not to make movies with her because people said she hid vodka in Pepsi bottles at meetings. But after a bad fall in 1974, Joan stopped drinking for good. The woman also gave up smoking. This showed how strong and determined she was, which helped her get through many hard times in her life. Joan Crawford had a glamorous life, but her death was a story full of drama and debate. The amount of her estate was about $1 when she died on May 10, 1977. $2 million, which now is worth more than $10 million. There was more to her wealth than just the money she made as a famous actor in Hollywood's golden age. Joan knew how to handle money well and had other ways to make money. She made a lot of money from her job with the Pepsi-Cola company. She was on the board and later became a spokesperson after marrying Alfred Steele, the CEO of the company, in 1955. There was more than just cash in her will. She had a lot of expensive things, like her apartment on East 69th Street in Manhattan, where she spent her last years, and a lot of Hollywood memorabilia, like her 1946 Oscar for Mildred Pierce. It was later sold for $400,000 for just that Oscar. $26,732 back in 1993. During her 50-year career, Joan also gathered a lot of gold, furs, and other valuable items. This was the most shocking part of Joan's estate, was her last will, which she signed not long before she died. Two of her kids, Christina and Christopher, were left out. A scary part of the will said, "It is my intention to make no provision herein for my son Christopher or my daughter Christina for reasons which are well known to them." This news shocked a lot of people because Joan's adoption of her children had been shown in the media as part of her perfect Hollywood family image. In 1940, she gave birth to Christina. In 1943, she had Christopher. In 1947, she had twins, Kathy and Cindy. The will, on the other hand, showed that she had serious problems with Christina and Christopher. Some of Joan's money was given to her younger daughters, Kathy and Cindy, and to a number of causes. The Mildred Pierce Oscar was one of them. Kathy later sold it at auction. Kathy and Cindy were each given a trust fund of $77,500, which is equal to $380,000 today. In her will, Joan also showed how kind she was. She left large amounts of money to organizations such as the USO, the American Cancer Society, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and the Motion Picture Home for Retired Film Workers. This was something she had been very concerned with all her life. Joan also saved $35,000 to thank her maid, Betty Barker, for all the years of hard work. She also saved smaller amounts for close friends and staff. But the choice to leave Christina and Christopher out of the will caused a very nasty court case. They sued to question the will only 5 months after Joan died. They said Joan wasn't thinking straight when she wrote her will and that Kathy and her husband had unfairly affected her. Joan's drinking in her later years is proof that she had bad judgment. During the case, many people who knew Joan in her last years came forward and family secrets were made public. In July 1979, after almost 2 years of court battles, a deal was reached. Christina and Christopher each got $27,500, which is a small part of the $2 million estate. Their claims were heard, even though they didn't get an equal share of the payment. They bought their house at 426 North Bristol Avenue in Brentwood, Los Angeles, for $57,500 in the summer of 1928. Joan Crawford lived there. She fondly called it El Jodo, which is a combination of her name and the name of her first husband, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. For almost 30 years, this house was her main home. Until 1956. The house used to be a Spanish-style villa, but it has been fixed up and added on to over the years to become a Georgian-style estate. It became a sign of Hollywood glitz and matched Crawford's growing fame. Crawford lived in El Jodo when her career was at its peak. She went from making silent movies to making talkies, and her role in Mildred Pierce earned her an Oscar in 1945. Many Hollywood parties were held at the house, and Clark Gable, Marlene Dietrich, and Barbara Stanwyck were among the guests. There were also photographers there when she accepted her Oscar while lying in bed claiming to be sick. It was a famous moment. Crawford often made improvements to the house. She added a large dining room, a new kitchen wing, and a three-car garage in 1935. By 1937, the house had a swimming pool, a private theater for showing movies, and a court that could be used for both badminton and tennis. It was well known that Crawford was crazy about keeping things clean. She made sure that sanitizer was used every day to clean the house. Her need to be perfect even showed in her clothes. She was famous for firing a maid who used wire hangers instead of soft ones, an event that became famous over time. It was 11,558 square feet, had 6 bedrooms and 10 bathrooms when Crawford moved out in 1956. It was decorated inside with silk, brocade, and gold highlights. The grand foyer had a long, winding staircase that Crawford often used to make grand appearances for her guests. The living room was very big and had a grand piano and custom-made furniture. 20 people could fit in the dining room for her fancy dinner parties. There was a sitting room, a dressing room, and a marble bathroom with a sunken tub in her master bedroom upstairs. The house had a wood-paneled study, a modern kitchen for the time, and a wine cellar. Each guest bedroom had its own bathroom. From the outside, the Olympic-sized pool and patio were perfect for having people over, and the private theater and pool house made the farm feel even more luxurious. El Jodo stood for Hollywood glitz, but it was said to have a darker side. Christina Crawford, Crawford's adopted daughter, wrote a book called Mommy Dearest in 1978. In it, she talked about claimed abuse and neglect in the mansion. Christina said that her mother got angry about wire hangers in her room and ripped clothes off of them while yelling, "Never use wire hangers again," that Joan would lock her in the dining room for hours if she didn't eat the rare meat. Christina said that the basement was sometimes used to lock her up as a punishment. According to these stories, Crawford was unstable and had violent attacks. She was also very strict about cleaning, but the claims in Mommy Dearest are still being talked about. Kathy and Cindy, Joan's other adopted children, denied the abuse claims and said she was loving and dedicated. The book changed the way people thought about El Jodo for good, no matter what was true. It stopped being a fancy home and started being a house with scary stories. There were tales of ghosts and other supernatural things happening at the fire even after Crawford left. Strange things were said to happen inside the house over the years. One of the most well-known stories was about a wall in the living room that allegedly caught fire twice in the 1940s and 1950s. The Beverly Hills Fire Department didn't know what was going on. Witnesses said the fires happened again in the same place in the 1980s. People who visited also said they saw a ghostly figure that looked a lot like Crawford near the stairs or her old bedroom in a long white dress. Some people even said they could hear a typewriter from Crawford's study, which is where he used to write checks. Reverend Rosalind Bruillera, a spiritual detective, was brought in to look at the house in 1989. She said it was a spiritual energy hub where she could feel the presence of everyone from Hollywood ghosts to gangsters and politicians. There were even scary tales that bodies were buried in the basement, but no proof was ever found. People were interested in El Jodo because of these ghost stories, to the fact that it is already famous for being a sign of old Hollywood and a mysterious place.